Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Rob Johnson, your professor for South Texas Literature. Thanks for taking the class. It's a little hard to make myself heard outside today because it's windy and I've got traffic behind me, but I'm at the Sherry Estate, which is just north of Buddy Owens Drive on Sherry Road. And what you'll be looking at in the videos I'm going to upload is the actual estate. And I'm here because I wanted you to see what's really ground zero for the modern valley. Another place I could have gone was the pump house in Hidalgo, where they first lifted the water out of the river with these massive pumps and created a series of irrigation canals that turned this from ranch land into the best farmland, some of the best farmland, Delta farmland in the world. You can see some of the orange groves that they grew 100 years ago back here, and some of the videos that I'll be uploading. And of course they were never able to do that until there was the system of canals that brought the water from the river. And then then they started a booming agricultural industry down here. Up until that point, the population was a majority Mexican and Mexican American, and a mixture of indigenous peoples and Mexican peoples, the mestizos and mestizas. But once the land down here was irrigated in lakes, with lakes like this one, this is an actual artificial lake, but it was used for irrigation as well. Once they could irrigate this land, it went from $10 an acre to $70 an acre. It multiplied vastly in value, and that attracted one of the largest migrations in the history of the United States. Anglos from all over the United States came down here to take advantage of this newly irrigated farmland, citrus groves, and almost overnight, within about a 20-year period, the land went from the possession of the Texas Mexicans into the hands of these newly arrived Anglos. The towns they built, and they're the towns that most of you live in, like McAllen or Mission or Harlingen, the town are all laid out along a railroad that shipped the produce out of here, to markets all across the United States, later in refrigerated cars. And they laid out the towns that they established along that railroad in a segregated fashion. There was what's called in Spanish La Línea in almost every town, separating the Mexican American and Anglo population. In Mission, Texas, which is not too far from where we are right now, that was actually a legally separated line on Friday and Saturday night, when the Mexican American population could not go to the main street there in Mission and go to a movie, have ice cream or whatever. They're restricted to the south side of the tracks on Friday and Saturday night. So it could be a very legal and brutal kind of segregation that existed. They created separate schools, separate neighborhoods, and there was that line that separated these two populations. The movie that I had you watch dramatizes in real life, in documentary form, the moment when those two populations separated by that line had to come to terms with each other. A simmering tension existed between the workers in Raymondville and the owners of the farmland, the farmers. And Hart Perry, the filmmaker, catches that moment when these two groups clash and something has to be decided. It's a moment that exists for just about every town in the valley in some way or another. In Pharr, it was the so-called Pharr riots, which had to do with unequal treatment by law enforcement. Same thing in McAllen. We had bad cops in McAllen. I live in McAllen, so I say we. We had bad cops in McAllen in the late 70s and early 80s, and that brought these issues to a head, these issues of inequality and separation, segregation. And perhaps most famously in Ed Couch Elsa It was the school walkout, which many of you are familiar with. My wife is from Elsa, and she has relatives who participated in that strike. And that town was never the same again. What Hart Perry was interested in was the aftermath, though. How did this town deal with, that clash? And in Raymondville, I don't know. The movie's kind of doubtful about that, right? It's dubious as to whether or not these two groups come together. In other places such as Pharr, it seems like they did. But in Ed Couch, also the result of the school walkout was that, within a few decades, there were hardly any Anglo people in those two towns.
Like 3.
What's that?
Like 3?
Like 3? My wife says about 3. So I asked you to think about what story the movie told, and it really is that story. I can tell you, though, that in my opinion, it has a happy ending. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Perhaps our best novelist down here, our best writer down here, Rolando Hinojosa Smith, dramatizes this whole arc of history in the Valley. And by the early 2000s, in his books, the Anglos and the Mexican American community are pretty much coming together. In my own experience, having lived here since 1995, I do think that that's the case. I saw the first Mexican American mayor of McAllen elected when I first moved here in 1995, Leo Montalvo. And we have a lot more representation by Mexican Americans in all aspects of government and on school boards and throughout the Valley than we did certainly 30 years ago, easily 30 years ago. So come out and look at this place. It's one of the most beautiful spots in the Valley. Go down to the Hidalgo pump house and you can see where they first pumped that water out of the river to irrigate these fields and create what they called the Magic Valley. And it really is quite beautiful when you see what they did. But it was created at a cost. I'll be sending more videos later. Thank you.